They called me lazy, after 8 years of saving their family empire. My wife sat silent as her sister fired me in front of the board, tossing me aside like nothing. But what they didn't know was that one forgotten contract still had my name on it, giving me the power to bring their entire company to its knees. Have you ever been underestimated by people who should have trusted you most? Share your thoughts or stories below. Sometimes the quietest victories come from those who were once dismissed. My name is Julian Rivera. I'm 39 years old, and this is how being betrayed by my own family's company became the turning point of my life. Julian stepped into the sleek, glass-walled boardroom of Crimson & Veil, a stack of papers tucked under his arm. His mind buzzed with numbers and projections, prepared to talk through the expansion plans he had been fine-tuning for weeks. But the air in the room felt wrong the moment he entered. Clarissa, his wife, sat at the long mahogany table, arms crossed tightly over her chest. Her face was expressionless, almost detached, and she kept her eyes fixed on the table, as if she barely registered his presence. Beside her, Bianca leaned back casually in her chair, a faint smirk tugging at her lips, like she had already won something Julian didn't yet understand. He hesitated for a second before setting his papers down, waiting for someone to speak. Bianca's voice sliced through the silence before he could say a word. "Julian," she said, her tone sharp and unapologetic. "We're letting you go. We don't need lazy people dragging us down." The word lazy hit him like a punch to the gut. His heart pounded hard in his chest, and his jaw tightened so much it hurt, but he didn't let his anger show. He glanced at Clarissa, hoping for something, even the smallest defense. But she stayed silent, her fingers tapping lightly on the table as if this were nothing more than a routine meeting. The weight of her silence felt heavier than Bianca's insult. Julian took a slow breath, forcing his face into the same polite smile he had used for years to smooth over tense negotiations. "All right," he said, his voice calm and even. "Good luck." He gathered his papers, gave a small nod, and turned to leave. His footsteps echoed against the polished floor, the sound hollow in the cold silence they left behind. The drive home passed in a blur. His hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that sweat slicked the leather, his knuckles white with tension. His chest felt tight, his mind replaying every detail of that boardroom scene. Clarissa's eyes refusing to meet his, Bianca's smug grin, and that single, cutting word, lazy. Years of late nights, endless meetings, and sacrifices flooded his thoughts. He had rebuilt their supply chain when it collapsed, negotiated deals that kept the company alive during its toughest years, and poured every ounce of himself into the business, not just for profit, but because it was his way of proving he belonged in Clarissa's world. And yet, today she had sat there like he was a stranger. The house felt like a museum when he stepped inside, the marble floors and high ceilings colder than usual. He dropped his keys on the kitchen counter and sank heavily onto the couch, staring up at the ceiling as the weight of betrayal pressed down on him. How could she have let this happen? Was this her decision, or was she just too weak to stand up to Bianca? He wasn't sure which answer would hurt more. His phone buzzed in his pocket, snapping him from the spiral of anger and disbelief. It was a message from Marco, the company accountant who had worked beside him through countless late nights. "I don't think they read your contract," the text read. Julian frowned, sitting up straighter. His contract? He hadn't thought about it in years. Not since Raphael, Clarissa's father, had still been running the company. He typed back quickly. "What's in it?" No reply came. He stared at the screen for a long moment, his mind already churning. Something shifted inside him, something sharp and calculating. The sting of betrayal didn't fade, but it was joined by a new feeling, curiosity, and maybe something darker. He stood abruptly and headed for his old files. If there was something in that contract, something they had overlooked, this might not be over after all. Julian was 31 when he married Clarissa Veil. At the time, Crimson & Veil was still firmly in the hands of her father, Raphael, a titan in the fashion and beauty industry who built the company from scratch and commanded respect with every gravel-toned word. Marrying Clarissa meant more than just love. It meant proving himself worthy of a family legacy steeped in ambition, prestige, and polished power plays. Julian had no illusions about the weight of that responsibility. When he joined the company, he didn't walk in expecting handouts or easy respect. He knew he had to earn it, and he was ready. Raphael had pulled him aside the first week and clapped a heavy hand on his shoulder. "You're the future of this company, Julian," he said, his voice low but firm. "Not because you married my daughter, but because you work like you mean it." That one sentence fueled Julian through everything that followed. Long nights hunched over purchase orders, flights across the country to smooth over disgruntled vendors, endless weekends rebuilding Crimson & Veil's collapsed supply chain after a key international distributor folded. He handled it all quietly and thoroughly. By the time the Peterson account landed, a high-stakes deal that kept the company afloat during a rough year, Raphael pulled him aside again. "You just saved us," he said. "You're not just part of this family. You're part of the legacy." But things changed when Raphael retired. At first, Clarissa had been supportive. She listened to his ideas, stayed up late with him reviewing spreadsheets, and defended him during strategy meetings. They weren't just spouses, they were a team. But that shifted as Bianca began inserting herself deeper into the business. Bianca Vale had always been ambitious, sharp, and unimpressed by anything that didn't carry the Vale name. She never hid her distaste for Julian's rise in the company, often brushing off his contributions as luck or circumstance. When Raphael handed over the reins, Bianca was the loudest voice in the room. Clarissa, once vocal and firm, started to withdraw. Little by little, decisions that used to be shared began happening without Julian's input. Marketing directions changed. Vendor relationships Julian had built were replaced or undermined. When he raised concerns, Bianca would sneer. "You're not the only one who works here, Julian. Maybe step back and let real leadership through." Clarissa never corrected her. At most, she'd offer a tight smile or avoid eye contact, as though neutrality could protect her from the damage being done. Julian tried to shake it off. Told himself it was temporary. Told himself that the 8 years he had spent pouring his soul into Crimson and Vale counted for something. Friends noticed the shift and joked about it over drinks. "Man, you're basically the unpaid son-in-law at this point," one laughed. Another chimed in, "They should be thanking you with a statue." Julian would chuckle, but it always left a better taste. The worst part wasn't Bianca's power grabs or even her open contempt. It was Clarissa's silence. During family meetings when Raphael wasn't around, Bianca would push for bold, reckless moves. Julian would speak up, try to explain the risks, and Clarissa would say nothing. Her loyalty had shifted. Whether it was out of fear, pressure, or something deeper, Julian didn't know. But each time she sat quiet, something inside him broke a little. Still, he held on, because he believed that results spoke louder than favoritism. That the work he had done couldn't be erased by politics. That belief shattered the moment Bianca called him lazy. And Clarissa just stared at the table. 8 years, gone in a blink. No defense, no fight, no recognition, just silence. That boardroom didn't just take his job. It crushed the illusion he had clung to for far too long. Julian sat in his home office long after the sun had set, the only light coming from the small lamp on the corner of his desk. Stacks of old files surrounded him, papers yellowed at the edges, some still marked with Raphael's old handwriting from years ago. His hands moved with steady purpose, even as his mind replayed the humiliation of that morning. Clarissa's blank stare, Bianca's smirk, the word lazy echoing like a bad joke in his head. But there was something else now, something stronger than anger. A flicker of curiosity, and maybe, just maybe, the start of a plan. Marco's text had been simple, almost casual, but it hadn't left Julian's mind. "I don't think they read your contract." The words gnawed at him. Marco wasn't the type to throw out a message like that for nothing. If he was hinting at the contract, it meant there was something buried in those legal pages they hadn't accounted for. Julian hadn't thought about the merger agreements in years, not since the late nights negotiating for that small tech firm Crimson and Vale had acquired. He remembered the deal vaguely, remembered Raphael insisting he handle it personally because of how much was at stake. But at the time, it had felt like just another project, not a lifeline. Now, as he sifted through folders labeled CNV Merger 2020, Julian felt his pulse quicken. Each binder brought back pieces of that year. The frantic negotiations, the celebration when the deal closed. Raphael clapping him on the back saying, "You've locked in the future for us, Julian." Back then, it had felt like praise. Now it felt like a ghost of something he needed to understand. Finally, buried under a stack of quarterly reports, he found it. The Crimson and Vale Tech subsidiary agreement. The black and white company logo stared back at him as he opened the first page, his hands suddenly steadier than they had been all day. He skimmed through the legal jargon, his eyes darting across paragraphs he barely remembered signing. Terms, conditions, percentages, all standard. Until page 17. Julian froze, leaning closer, his breath catching as the words came into focus. Julian Rivera, appointed co-chairman of the Crimson and Vale Tech subsidiary, with full authority over all intellectual property, patents, and trademark assets. He read it twice, then a third time, as if the letters might rearrange themselves. But they didn't. It was right there, signed by Raphael, stamped by the company's lawyers. Julian sat back, the weight of the discovery settling over him. They had fired him from Crimson and Vale, but the subsidiary wasn't under their direct control. Every patent, every design, every piece of intellectual property that gave the company its value, all of it ran through the subsidiary. And all of it required his approval. Without his signature, the company was dead in the water. A slow smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. Not the polite smile he'd forced in the boardroom, but something colder, sharper. They thought they'd cut him loose, but in reality, they'd handed him the rope. All he had to do was decide how to pull it. For the first time since that morning, his chest felt lighter. The betrayal still burned, but now there was something else. Control. The next morning, his phone buzzed, breaking the quiet of the house. Clarissa hadn't come home, and the empty silence of marble floors and high ceilings felt less suffocating now, almost welcome. Julian glanced at the screen. Raphael Vale. The name alone made his jaw tighten. He hesitated for a beat before answering. Julian, Raphael's voice came sharp and angry with none of his usual controlled calm. What the hell is going on? Haven't they read the damn contract? They can't move a thing without you. Julian stayed silent for a moment, letting Raphael's words sink in like music. They hadn't read it. They really didn't know. He kept his tone even, almost indifferent. You'd have to ask them, he said finally. Julian woke up the next morning to the sound of his phone buzzing on the nightstand. He didn't rush to check it. He already knew who it would be. Clarissa, maybe Bianca, maybe both. The house was quiet, still stripped of the warmth it once had, but now that silence felt almost satisfying. He finally picked up the phone and scrolled through the notification. There they were. Clarissa's texts sent through the night. Julian, please, we need to talk. This has gone too far. Can we meet? Just the two of us. Her words were careful, almost rehearsed, like she thought politeness could erase what happened in that boardroom. Bianca's messages were the opposite. Short, angry, dripping with arrogance even now. You're sabotaging us. You'll regret this. Julian set the phone back down without replying to either of them. Instead, he opened Marco's latest update. The accountant had become his eyes and ears inside Crimson and Veil without ever being asked. Staff are panicking, Marco's message read. 2 senior managers quit yesterday. Clients are already threatening to pull contracts. Noelle's freaking out, heard her yelling at Bianca. Julian read it twice, letting the words settle. It was working. Every hour he stayed silent, the walls closed in on them. He spent most of the morning pacing his office, letting them stew. Every buzz of his phone, every unread email was another small victory. By noon, another text came from Marco. Board split. Raphael's pushing for you to step in. Noelle's looking for loopholes, but there aren't any. Julian smiled, a quiet, genuine smile this time. He didn't need to do anything yet. Silence was more powerful than any move he could make right now. But Clarissa wasn't giving up. Around 1, his phone rang, her name lighting up the screen. Julian let it ring twice before answering, his voice flat. Yes? Her tone was different from the last time they spoke. Softer, almost shaky. Julian, can we meet? Please, just lunch. We need to talk. He let the silence stretch just long enough for her to sound nervous. Finally, he said, the place on 5th. Noon. He arrived early at the restaurant, a quiet corner booth where they used to sit when things were good. It felt strange to be back, sitting there with a glass of water watching the door. Clarissa walked in right on time, her coat pulled tight around her, her face pale. She forced a smile as she slid into the seat across from him. Hi, she said, her voice almost too light, too casual for what this was. Julian nodded once. Clarissa. She fidgeted with her napkin, then leaned in. This got out of hand. Bianca pushed for it. Noelle said it was legal, and I didn't know how to stop it. But we need you. The company's falling apart. Please, just sign off on the IP. Julian's expression didn't change. He took a slow sip of water, then set the glass down. You fired me like a stranger. Now deal with the consequences. Her face flushed and she looked down, picking at the napkin. Julian, I didn't want this. I tried to... He cut her off, his voice steady. You sat there. You didn't say a word. She didn't answer, just stared at the table. When the food came, neither of them ate much. Clarissa poked at her salad, her hands shaking slightly. Julian finished his burger in silence, his mind already moving ahead. When the check came, he paid for his half, stood, and looked at her one last time. Good luck. The same words he'd used in the boardroom. Then he walked out, leaving her sitting there, staring at her untouched plate. Back home, Julian didn't waste time. He sat at his desk, the merger contract open beside him, and drafted a single email. It was addressed to every major partner, supplier, and board member. The message was short, professional, and devastating. Effective immediately, all licensing agreements and subsidiary-controlled intellectual property are frozen pending review. No new contracts will be approved without my signature. He read it once more, then hit send. The response was immediate. His phone buzzed non-stop for the next hour. Marco's update came early in the morning, his voice brisk over the phone. It's getting worse, Julian. 3 major clients canceled their contracts overnight. Investors are pulling back. Sales are in free fall. And Noelle, well, she's done. Julian sat at his desk, calm, his coffee cooling beside him. Done? He asked. Marco let out a short laugh. Bianca blamed her in front of half the staff yesterday, called her incompetent. Noelle packed her things and left by evening. Julian pictured the chaos, Bianca lashing out, Clarissa trying to hold everything together. Clarissa? He asked finally. Marco sighed. She's in over her head, running operations, fielding angry calls, trying to keep staff from quitting. But she's drowning, Julian. She's completely isolated now. Even the board's starting to question her. Julian leaned back in his chair, letting the silence stretch. Clarissa, who once sat by Bianca's side in smug silence, now carrying the weight alone. He didn't reply to Marco right away. He didn't need to. They both knew this was exactly what he intended. Control through quiet pressure. By late afternoon, Marco texted again. Raphael's furious. He's calling an emergency board meeting tomorrow. Wants you there. Julian stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back. As what? Marco replied almost instantly. Executive chairman of the IP subsidiary. His words exactly. He's done letting the girls run the show. The next morning, Julian arrived at the boardroom early, dressed sharp in a dark suit, his expression unreadable. The atmosphere in the room was tense. Raphael sat at the head of the table, his face tight with anger, but nodding in acknowledgement when Julian entered. Clarissa sat to the side, pale and exhausted, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. Bianca slouched in her chair, glaring at everyone like a cornered animal. Raphael started the meeting immediately, his voice sharp. Crimson and Veil is bleeding out. Clients are leaving, staff are quitting, and all because of reckless decisions. His gaze shifted to Bianca, who looked away. Julian holds the IP. We can't move forward without him. And we need stability. Effective immediately. I'm proposing a vote. He paused, letting the silence settle before continuing. Julian Rivera, Executive Chairman of the IP subsidiary. Full authority over all intellectual property decisions. Bianca Veil removed from client operations. Clarissa Veil demoted to Chief Operating Officer, reporting directly to Julian. The room buzzed with murmurs. One by one, the hands went up. Raphael's allies first, then others who were tired of the chaos. The motion passed quickly. Bianca shoved her chair back, muttering under her breath as she stormed out of the room. Clarissa didn't move, her eyes fixed on the table, her face unreadable. All eyes turned to Julian. He sat forward, his voice calm and steady. I'll agree, but on my terms. No more family politics. Merit-based hires only. Every decision regarding the IP and its licensing goes through me. Final authority, no exceptions. If this company survives, it will be because we do things the right way. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Raphael nodded firmly, his tone decisive. You have my full support. This is what should have happened from the start. Julian gave a single nod in return. The decision was made. The power had shifted. And for the first time since they fired him, he felt the balance settle entirely in his favor. Julian arrived at the office early, his first official day as executive chairman of the IP subsidiary, and the energy felt different already. The staff glanced up as he walked through the lobby, their expressions cautious but hopeful. He went straight to his new office, sunlight streaming through the wide windows, and immediately called Marco. Congratulations, boss, Marco said as soon as he picked up. His voice was lighter than it had been in weeks. The numbers are bad, but fixable. We just need the right leadership. You're it, Julian said simply. CFO, effective immediately. Clean up the books and get me a report by next week. There was a pause, then Marco laughed, the sound filled with relief. You got it. I'll be in before lunch. Next, Julian sent a text to Harper, the department head who had reached out when things started to collapse. VP of Brand Strategy. Starting today, are you still in? Her response came within seconds. Absolutely. Walking in now. By mid-morning, Marco was in his office reviewing financials, and Harper was already sketching out new branding ideas in the conference room. Julian moved between them, giving quick, clear instructions. No shortcuts, no politics. We're building this the right way. Clarissa, however, had no choice but to sit quietly through it all. As COO, she now reported directly to Julian. Her daily operational summaries arrived on his desk before 10 every morning, typed perfectly. But her presence in meetings was subdued. She sat stiff in her chair, taking notes as Julian spoke, answering only when directly asked. In one meeting, Harper pitched a new client outreach strategy, full of bold colors and strong messaging. Julian leaned back, considering, then nodded. Do it. Give me a launch timeline by Friday. Clarissa opened her mouth slightly, as if to comment, then shut it, her pen moving quickly across the page instead. Marco slid a folder across the table during the same meeting. 2 major suppliers are willing to renegotiate contracts under the new terms. They just want assurance you're staying in charge. They'll have it, Julian said, signing the documents immediately. Send confirmations tonight. Clarissa's jaw tightened, but she said nothing. Her silence became a pattern. In every meeting, she listened while Julian directed. Her old confidence stripped away. The power she once had through family ties was gone, replaced by a structure she could not control. Bianca, meanwhile, was nowhere to be seen. Julian's inbox held 3 separate apology emails from her, all long, desperate, and full of excuses. He didn't open any of them. He didn't need to. Bianca had been removed from client operations, and without influence, her words carried no weight. By the end of the first week, the shift in the company was obvious. Clients who had been wary of Crimson and Veil's instability were starting to respond. Marco handed Julian a preliminary report on Friday morning. Licensing deals are reopening. 2 of the big investors have agreed to stay. They like the new terms. Harper walked in minutes later, a bright smile on her face. Feedback on the new branding's good, Julian. Clients are saying it feels stable again, like the old days. Julian glanced at Clarissa, who stood quietly by the doorway with her daily report in hand. She met his eyes for a second, then looked away. Good, Julian said, setting the report aside. We're not done yet, but this is a start. The company was no longer drowning. Under his leadership, trust was returning. And for the first time in months, Crimson and Veil felt like a business again, not a family's power game. Julian sat at his desk early Monday morning. The soft hum of the office outside a reminder of how much had changed in just a few weeks. Papers were stacked neatly in front of him, drafts of new bylaws he had spent the weekend perfecting. He read each line carefully before signing, his pen moving with deliberate precision. These weren't just rules, they were safeguards designed to make sure no one would ever wield power in the careless, vindictive way Clarissa and Bianca had. One clause in particular gave him quiet satisfaction. No executive could remove critical leadership without full board oversight and a majority vote. It wasn't just about protecting himself. It was about ensuring the company would never be at the mercy of unchecked ambition again. He slid the signed documents into a folder and handed them to Marco when he stepped into the office. Get these filed immediately, Julian said. Marco glanced through the top pages, nodding with approval. This locks it down tight. Smart move. No one can touch you, or anyone else who earns their spot, without a damn good reason. That's the point, Julian replied. This company will run on merit, not family politics. By midweek, the changes were already visible. The energy in the building felt alive in a way Julian hadn't seen in years. Employees moved with purpose, conversations carried a new optimism, and for the first time in months, people actually smiled when they passed him in the hall. Harper's branding campaign was rolling out smoothly, and Marco's restructuring of the finances gave staff confidence that Crimson and Veil was on solid ground again. Departments that had once operated in tension were collaborating, sharing updates openly instead of hoarding information out of fear. Julian made it a point to walk the floors himself, stopping to thank employees personally. He shook hands, asked about their projects, and made sure every person understood they were valued because of their work, not their last name or connections. One young designer looked almost embarrassed when Julian stopped at her desk. You've been pulling late nights on the new product line, Julian said. I saw the mock-ups. They're solid work. The designer's eyes widened slightly. Thank you, sir. I didn't think you'd notice. Julian gave a small smile. I notice everything that matters. Keep it up. Word of those conversations spread quickly. It wasn't just about leadership, it was about trust. People wanted to be here again, not just to collect a paycheck, but because they believed in what they were building. Clarissa stayed professional, sending her daily reports on time, but she kept her distance. She rarely spoke in meetings unless Julian asked her directly, and when she did, her answers were short and precise. She knew better than to challenge him now. Bianca, on the other hand, was still absent, her unanswered apology emails lingering in Julian's inbox like ghosts of a past he no longer cared to revisit. Late Friday evening, Julian stood by the window in his office, the city glowing beneath the setting sun. The glass reflected his own calm expression, a stark contrast to the man who had walked out of that boardroom weeks ago, humiliated and betrayed. Crimson and Veil thrived now, not because of family power plays, but because he had rebuilt it from the ground up, with rules that couldn't be bent by ego or greed. He watched as employees left for the weekend, their voices light, their laughter genuine. The office no longer felt like a cage, it felt like a place where people wanted to be. That was his doing. Julian rested his hand on the window ledge, taking a slow breath. They fired me to erase me, he thought, his eyes on the bustling street below. Instead, I became the foundation they'll never control again. He allowed himself a quiet, real smile before turning back to his desk. There was still work to be done, but now it was his way, on his terms, and that made all the difference.